about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pimping America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclose a big holes at the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bunch of great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. And we are here, as always, as part of UCY TV. Here at UCY TV, thanks to Jules and her work making this network responsible. Making this network responsible for making this network possible. If you haven't checked out any of the other shows, definitely do. For the people that just listen to Voice of Rebellion, but also just great to be back here at Voice of Rebellion Radio, and we were talking about tonight Palestine, and we are talking the whole Palestinian situation, and really talk about this story that's been. They seem to be the forgotten group in a lot of situations, and on the mainstream media, of course, you don't hear anything about them. And when you do hear them about them, they're portrayed as villains, terrorists, and these ultimately as justified homicides, as the media is always defending the Israeli massacres of these Palestinians. So when it comes to mainstream media, yes, they are the ones that are forgotten about. Or not forgotten about, but they're intentionally whitewashed out of what happens to the Palestinians is not talked about, as criticism towards one certain country is not allowed on our media, which that's an operation that goes back years. We're talking about 30 years or so of complete elimination of all criticism of the Zionists, and the Israeli government has a lot of influence over our media, over our, the Zionists have a lot of influence over our media, over our politicians, and over a lot of aspects in our country. And Operation Mockingbird is a very telling sign of that. And we, as Americans that know what's going on over there, we are now we're in a predicament, it seems like, because anytime you start talking about it, they label you as racist. You can't talk about it with your friends, family. You get ostracized, and you start talking about Palestine, and start talking about how these people live in worse than open-air prison. These people live without basic human needs, such as food, water, and as well, they don't have a standing army to protect themselves. They are occupied by Israel. But even when you start talking about occupation and start using that word, occupation, to describe what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, they start towing that line of that you're anti-Semitic, is the word they always say, even though it's a ad hominem attack, because it doesn't really weigh any meaning. Because in reality, the Semitic people are the Palestinians, and the Ashkenazi Jews that inhabit mostly in Israel, mostly the Ashkenazi Jews that inhabit in Israel, those people are not Semitic. So it's ultimately just a catch-all phrase, it seems like, that is used oftentimes when you talk about it, when you start criticizing the Zionists and what they do to the Palestinians. And, a lot of times, I think a more proper, an actual word that you could say is anti-Jewish for a lot of times what they are saying that you're doing, but you're not actually doing. So, it's not anti-Semitic. They are anti-Semitic. They're the ones that are bombing the Palestinians, who are Semitic people. The Israelis are not Semitic, bombing Semitic people, and they're killing Semitic people, making them anti-Semitic. We are now faced with, nowadays it's controversial even to say there's a billboard up north, like up in Michigan. They start putting these billboards around that said "America First, not Israel." And this was actually a controversial thing. They called it an anti-Semitic sign, and because there's actually one group, I think it's of AmericansNew.org.com. They started. They put billboards up around this country, and they were actually able to, I don't know if they put up that specific billboard, but they got under a lot of flack for actually being able to have the ability to at least get people's attention via that. And they seem to be made the only group really in the United States that I know of that actually is organized and actually, it's like kind of like, and they're not really a lobbying group even, just a group to grab attention, an educational group to grab the attention of what's going on in Palestine. And they have all the charts and graphs, and it's a great website if you haven't checked it out sometime. They mostly focus on the more basic facts, but these basic facts most Americans do not know of. And this, since it's an actual group that actually gets people's attention, of course, they are demonized by the Zionist influencers in this country. But this is basic facts. For example, most Americans don't know that 2,000 plus Palestinians died in just 1 month in 2014. They don't know that there were so many people, so many Palestinians were getting killed, and the Palestinian children also that were getting killed. But there were so many Palestinian people that were getting killed that they were storing bodies in ice cream freezers because they didn't have enough room to store the bodies. They didn't know that horrible fact of the people being stored in ice cream freezers. This is the morbid situation that the Palestinians were facing during Operation Protective Edge. And and then they try to make it seem like on the media that this is an actual war when it was just a complete genocide. 2,000 Palestinians died, and 80% of them were civilians. And that means that they didn't even shoot a rocket or nothing, no kind of defense. And at that point, when you have all this happening to you, your land being stolen, them bombing you for no reason, and them denying you basic human needs, is shooting a rocket really something to be such criticized? It seems justified almost at that point. And only four Israeli citizens died, and a total of maybe 55 Israelis total died, and so I think like 59 total Israelis died, and 2,000 Palestinians died. 2,000 Palestinians being 80% civilians, that makes it 1,600 Palestinian civilians were killed, compared to 59 Israelis being killed for about approximately about 7% were civilians, I guess that was something like that, and 93% were combatants, IDF murderers. So, it's not even close. It's 4 versus 1,600 civilians, and out of those Palestinians, I would say that a lot of the people that are being considered combatants were literally just somebody who shot a rocket back. They consider people that throw rocks to be dangerous threats over there. That's how That's how much of pussies these guys are in the IDF, that they will shoot a little kid for throwing a rock at their tank or something like that, while they do these unspeakable actions, and all they happens to them is that they get a rocket shot back at them. And also, that was just one of many different events that have happened just in recent times of the Israelis doing some kind of unjustified provocation, but not just a provocation, but unjustified genocide against the Palestinian people, as we saw in 2008-09. They all the time are talking about how Bashar al-Assad has chemical weapons. They're going to start hearing that rhetoric a lot again. How he has chemical weapons, or that he's used chemical weapons in whatever city, in Damascus, Aleppo, or whatnot. But it's the Israelis who used weapons of mass destruction or chemical weapons. They used white phosphorus in the 2008-09 war that they did with the Palestinians, and I think more people were killed in that, or I think it was about about 1,400, I think, were killed during the 08-09, a couple months. The 2014 Operation Protective Edge was perhaps the worst that the Palestinians had seen since May 19. I don't know. Might have been the worst months that they saw since 1973, when the Yom Kippur War happened. And of course there was the 67. This is right up there with some of the worst times for the Palestinians: the 67 war, 73 war, the 1948 Al Nakba, which all times the Israelis talk about how that they are part of the reason they're justified that having taken that land in 1948 was the Holocaust. And they repeat it all the time, the Holocaust, and they say that if they try to associate the enemies of political Zionism on a local scale, as in Israel-Palestine scenario, and also to us people that they really don't like, the people that not just oppose Zionism on the scale that, people who believe Zionism to be a satellite of American interests, but people that realize more that American interests are more closer to being a satellite of Zionist interest, rather than the Zionism being an American satellite, realizing that Israel is a higher level than the United States, and realizing that it's a global thing, global Zionism that affects not just even the Middle East. It affects all over the world. It has effects. It has effects in Europe. It has effects in the United States heavily, of course, Canada, even in South America, Africa, and even in Asia. It has effects. As we've seen, it was inside the Chinese government, what appears to be political Zionists. And we've definitely seen over there in Zionists heavily interfering, and I believe it to be true, that when those two Malaysian planes fell out of the sky the same year, one because of disappeared over the Indian Ocean, and the other one because it happened to have been a plane targeted by one of Israel's closest allies in Europe, West Ukraine, MH17. Even though they blamed it on the Russians, it was the West Ukrainians are the ones that actually, now the evidence shows that they did it, which is one of Israel's closest allies. They provide them a lot of their weapons, and they are probably their second biggest financier besides the United States. They're one of the closest allies of Israel in Europe. West Ukraine shot down that plane. Both were Malaysian Airlines planes. At that time, Malaysia had decided around that they're going to put Israeli war criminals to, at least it might not, even without them there, would charge them with war crimes. And they also decided that they would go to one of the biggest threats to the large banking system of IMF, the World Bank, this network of banks that are to crush third world countries like that, and to give all the money to the bankers. They were going to join BRICS. It was so with that happening, I don't think it was I think that the global Zionists could have definitely had a impact on why those planes went down like they did. I don't think it's coincidental. and people say, about me is that I'm sure people say that they'll think that these are conspiracies, crackpot. These are unfounded, not realizing that but then they'll just skip the part where I put it, piece it all together, and actually show to an extent. I put there definitely was those things happen at the same time, and also on the when it comes to the Malaysian Airlines flights going down, just think about it, that the Israelis definitely had a big interest in doing something to Malaysia like that. And, if you know about the 9/11, the whole story behind 9/11, and you realize their whole part in it, and you just look at, over the years, the different plots by the Mossad and their intelligence services, these very intricate plots, you realize that it's not that crazy. The fact that they've done stuff all around the world, very elaborate stuff. Like, I think, for example, they've been proven in a few of these places that have been involved. I think that, for example, they were involved with the '94 bombing of the synagogue, or the Jewish center. It was a Jewish center in Argentina, which has been long used as a political toy for the Zionists inside of Argentina, like Marcio Macri, in order to justify our villainy, or to justify the villain, to make Iran look like a villain, by saying that the Iranians had some kind of involvement in this attack, which we've realized from what the Zionists do in their own country, realized that their tactics, that they're willing to kill, they're definitely willing to kill other Jewish people, and they're even willing to kill probably their own people, Israelis, in order to justify some kind of massive provocation. A lot of people were saying that those 3 Israelis, remember the thing that the jump started the 2014 genocide was the fact that they said 3 Palestinians were kidnapped and killed. Yeah, they're saying that they were kidnapped and by Palestinians, and with that, it started the. They said this is what justified what happened. So I think that there was a lot of people saying that those people were actually, that the Israelis did away with them, or that it was a made-up story altogether. I think that a lot of people think is that the Israelis might have killed those 3 in the first place, because they were it was time for them to do some massive statement against the Palestinians. And ultimately what all 2014 has done is brought their crimes to a global scrutiny. All around the world, I think now, the amount of attention towards Israel has really went up. And, at the same time, the support, I think, the United States might have been boosted, as I've seen with, you really see the hardcore Zionists really ramp up their efforts in the United States, like in the hardcore Christian Zionist groups inside the United States really ramp up their efforts in order to whitewash the crimes of the Israelis, such as John Hagee and other, the Christian Zionist groups inside this country, John Hagee being one of the major ones that really, that puts that line to American Christians that if you don't support Israel, you're going to hell. And, equating modern-day Israel with the ancient Israel described in the Bible. The Zionists and the Zionists around the world, they're all over the place. They're in, they got Marcio Macri. I talk about global Zionism. It's that the fact that these politicians that are, for Zionism, and make it a big part of their party platform, make it a big part of their party's ideology or their foreign policy to have good relations with Israel. That's all over the place. As it is a global issue. It's definitely it's definitely disheartening to think about all what goes on just on a daily basis. These horrific stories. A 7-year-old is killed in Palestine, shot in the head by Israeli soldiers. There's a 12-year-old gets ran over by a tank. Stuff like that happens. These aren't specific examples I'm quoting. I'm just saying the kind of stuff that happens. But I've seen stuff like 3-year-old heavily beaten by Israeli soldiers. 15-year-old, there's one that was from Tampa, actually, or something like that. He was throwing rocks, and he got heavily beaten down by the Israeli soldiers, Palestinian, and it made kind of like local news around here, but they didn't talk too much about it. But I remember the fact that it actually made the news, and I found that interesting, but it shows that the effects are everywhere. That we shouldn't, some Americans think they like not to focus on it because, they think this is something far away. This is something that doesn't really concern them. But, it's like I said, it's global effects. It's global Zionism for a reason. And the fact is that they ultimately, at the top, all those New World Order, the top people, Kissinger, Soros, Rothschild, Rockefeller, they're all Zionists in the end. And Israel was was the Rothschilds practically pretty close to, the Rothschilds were very much behind the creation of Israel. They practically created it. And the Zionists as well, the Zionists almost immediately caused one of the most horrible things to happen. There's a word, al-Nakba, is a tragedy in Arabic. And the Palestinians' story really begins, the modern story really begins with that, because that's where they lost their land and they were chased out. Hundreds of thousands of them were forced to leave or killed, and many of them ran to Jordan. And there's all these stories about a lot of times what I don't like about what people say is that they'll say, well, if the Palestinians are so decent a people, why are they not accepted by their Arab brothers? Why are they not allowed really in Saudi Arabia and other countries when they run? Because those countries are very much tied together with Israel, with trade, or people say that Saudi Arabia, they say that Saudi Arabia and Israel don't have formal relations. And a lot of these Arab countries, they a lot of times do that, is that they might not have formal relations with Israel, but they're very much tied in with trade, military. I mean, the two countries that have been working very heavily towards pushing Western countries and and all these countries' war with Iran has been these two. It's been Israel and Saudi Arabia. And actually, Saudi Arabia has they have an island that's owned by, that Israel has, but they don't dispute it, even though that it's a disputed island, but they're not fighting it because Saudi Arabia and Israel have this de facto truce, and they both are controlled by the New World Order. And the Al Saud family is one of the wealthiest families in the world. They have $1.3 trillion, the Saudi family, the Saudi royal family, recently had a change with now King Salman has taken place. And you see that they continue their foreign policy of war against Assad, or supporting the war against Assad and supporting the proxies of the United States and Israel, and also Saudi Arabia and all these Gulf countries in their war against Assad. And you see the continuing of the Saudis. Also, they keep saying that the Iranians are going to use their nukes that they, or they're going to develop nukes and then use them. And the truth is that, Israel is the only one in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons, or Pakistan as well. They have nuclear weapons as well. But Israel is the only ones with nuclear weapons that are not part of the non-proliferation treaty. But that's not really the important part. Is the fact that Israel also does have a giant nuclear weapons arsenal, 411 of them, and they created their nuclear weapons program illegally. Ultimately, it was a secret nuclear weapons program in the 60s that LBJ turned a blind eye to, but JFK didn't before him. And JFK wanted to stop the Israeli nuclear weapon program, but he was killed before before he could bring a stop to it. But he was going to send monitors to Dimona nuclear facilities where they were building these nuclear weapons over there in Israel. And in 1963, I think that's when that was going on. And then by the end of the 60s, they already had the nuclear weapons. And the Israelis were... the Israelis, after that, you still had 1973, the war that they started then. And then just on, it just seemed to be that they became no longer able to be challenged. And in the United States, the sentiment slowly became that Israel can no longer be challenged by our opinions. We can't have the opinion that the Israelis stole the land. It's not even an opinion. It's a fact. It's a fact that the Israelis stole the land. They stole the land from the Palestinians, and the Palestinians were forced out and murdered a lot of them. And what this was the Al-Nakba. And Al-Nakba, they say didn't happen. The Israelis, officially, what they say, and they spent a lot of time also, their propagandists online often say the Al-Nakba is just is not a real event that actually happened. They say that it was a made-up thing by the Palestinians in order to justify disapproval of Israel. But what that ultimately sounds like is it sounds like what they always criticize people. They criticize anyone that even touches the subject of the Holocaust to the extent of any kind of criticism of the numbers, or they believe the numbers exaggerated, or that didn't happen altogether. Which ultimately, a lot of times the people, it's mostly a accusation that gets people to immediately flip against you, because when people think you're a Holocaust denier, they think you're a shithead, and they say it against the Iranian president. But most of the times, the people that they say Holocaust denier against are not actually Holocaust deniers. They just are against. They acknowledge the Holocaust that's going on inside of Palestine today. And that Holocaust that's going on today, as probably about 6 million Palestinians have died since 1948. That's at least a number. That's a solid number, I would think, considering the fact that about at least a few 100,000 died just in the first opening months or two of the the first year of Israel's existence. And there's been the 1967 war, where many of them died. There was the 1973 war. A lot of them died there. We've had recurring instances like 2014, 2008, 09, 2012, the little short conflict that they had then. And we've had many different, just solid 5 killed here, 3 killed there. Solidly, like every day. It's like an average, like every few days, another innocent Palestinians killed by the IDF. And if you look at it that way, definitely you can see how it could have totaled up to 6 million. And also the amount of people that might not have died from literally a lead bullet, an actual bullet going into them, but the starvation, the dehydration, the disease, that they couldn't, they don't have the adequate medical care. A lot of their medical care instead of Israel is provided by volunteers and stuff like that, like what we saw Mads Gilbert, who volunteered to help injured Palestinians during the 2014 war, who was, did one of the most commendable actions of anyone in a medical field could do, I think, the guy had it made up there in, I think, Norway, where he lived, and then he decided that he had the goodness, there was no incentives or anything like that to do this. It was just out of the goodness of his heart, he decided to go down to Palestine and volunteer. But the Palestinians are denied adequate medical care and denied practically everything. They're walled in, and it's a giant line just to get out into Israel, where there's anything of developed really. Palestine. It's like the difference between Palestine and Israel is like the difference between an African country in the United States and the amount of how stuff is developed. Israel is doing better than us, for sure, on our own tax dollars. They're a thriving country on other people's money, and as well the suffering that they inflict on the Palestinians, and as well they also rely on a lot of suckers who do tourism there. And I think that anybody that all the people that have been duped by the Christian Zionist preachers telling that this place is so wonderful, and this is the same as biblical Israel, and that we must support them no matter what. There's a lot of people in America that's been duped, and a lot of people that have went over there and spent a lot of money and gave the Zionists a lot of money going over there. And the Zionists have so much money to hand out that they'll hand out free trips and stuff like that to people, propaganda tours. Sometimes you notice that if you go real hard and you bring a lot of the facts in an argument with a Zionist troll, they'll offer you a trip to Israel. Now, I have a couple hypotheses on what happens when you take that trip, and one of those hypotheses would lead me to say that if you take that trip, you're a dummy, because I know that these people are sick fucks, and you could definitely, even if you're not killed by literally when you get off the plane, they'll say that whatever happened to you, settlers or something got to you, and the Israelis almost toe the line that settlers are not part of their government, even though they're 100% part of their government. Or they'll say something like, random act of kidnapping or something like that happened. Just, that's probably what they'll say. Just some random act of kidnapping happened and you died. You definitely get black bagged by the Israeli government. Put a black bag on your head and throw you in a van and you get disappeared. And that's hypothesis. The very minimum, I guess, is that it's going to be a propaganda tour where they think they can somehow flip you over to their side by showing you some heavily distorted version of their country, and show them that they're not, and try to show you all the nice stuff that they have. But to anybody that's truly awake, I think that they would realize that nice stuff is all paid for by American taxpayer money. Not they didn't earn that stuff. They didn't build that stuff up with their own money. And ultimately, they have an unlimited credit card, too, from the Rothschilds, because the Rothschilds are heavily connected. I mean, the Supreme Court of Israel relies on Rothschild Boulevard. The Knesset the architect was a Rothschild. The Balfour Declaration is written not to the Jews, but to the Rothschilds. So the Rothschilds' fingerprints are all over Israel. All over it. And just wandering over to the chat room here, waiting for it to load, see what's going on there, see what any questions or anything going on. Takes a second to load. Okay, here you go. And the whole Israel's a chosen one thing has been. It's only the Zionists. The whole effort has been going back to about 100. It's back to the 1800s. The whole Zionist project, and they tried to succeed with getting the. They tried to succeed with getting the Zionist land and trying to get the Palestinian land in 1901 when it was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and they offered the current Sultan of the at the time of the Ottoman Empire $150 million in order to, or it was 150 million pounds in. There's 150 million pounds, and the Sultan said, "No, doesn't matter what kind of money you give to me, I'll never take it." So when that happened, the Zionists realized they're going to have to go to some real dirty tactics in order to do that. And the Zionists ended up going well into the the Zionists was started. They got involved into the Young Turks movement that was ultimately very much for the result for the Ottoman Empire's collapse in the end. And the Ottoman Empire ultimately listed their fall in World War One. The British were able to seize the land during World War One, and the British took over the land, the Palestinian land, and made the Mandate of Palestine, which they already had wrote. And then they wrote before the war had even ended. They wrote the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration already had decided to give the land to the Palestinian, or not the Palestinians, to give them to the Israelis. In 1948, the land ended up in the Israelis' hands, and now it's been almost 70 years of since Al-Nakba, and there's been constant suffering since inflicted on the Palestinians by the Israelis. And the Israelis have been involved since. Also, they've also been involved with inflicting a lot of suffering on the Middle East, and also have been involved with a lot of the destabilization and a lot of the helping with the United States foreign policy in the Middle East. And, you could say that, or the United States is helping, ultimately it's about equal how much they are contributing towards that. And the Palestinians also, they're at the center of ultimately the destruction of the Middle East by the Israelis, and Palestine being completely erased off the map like it has been. Now it's just the Palestinian land is, still occupied land. The Palestinian land is just a few specks in the West Bank and Gaza. That's it. And the Israelis have taken just about all their other land for themselves. In fact, the Israelis have settlements all in the West Bank land that the Palestinians supposedly own, but they don't really own it. It's occupied. So, ultimately the amount of official land that the Palestinians even own officially is very little, and the amount of land that the Palestinians actually own is none, really, because, or what they actually control. They own all of it. The Palestinians are the rightful owners to the entire strip, but they do not control any of it at the moment, and millions of Palestinians are forced to live in these horrid conditions in the few in the West Bank, and there's the 2 million that are lumped into Gaza, and most of them live in Gaza City, and that's what it's just, Gaza's a little tiny strip, the size of, you think that, that the Israeli, the Israeli strip is just is the size of Connecticut, and this thing is very small inside of Israel, so it's like something that barely even fits really Gaza City. And inside of Gaza, they all have been practically herded into Gaza City. So when they do bomb, they do. There's a lot of people per. There's a lot. It's very dense, populated areas, and the Palestinians are forced to stay there pretty much because there's no way out. The only way out is via the Egyptian border. It's often closed, or the ocean. And the Egyptian border, a lot of them try to tunnel out and go across the Egyptian border illegally. But the problem is that a lot of times they flood the tunnels, so make it impossible for even just sometimes they don't try to actually leave. They just try to go across, gather supplies in Egypt, and come back to Palestine. But once the tunnels flooded, it makes it impossible. And the tunnels are flooded often by the Egyptian government, which El-Sisi unfortunately has been, this is the kind of actions that he's done that has ultimately left him being labeled as a Zionist puppet. And there was some hope for him when he first came in that he would be different. But in the end, El-Sisi was considered, in the end, El-Sisi just ended up doing Israel's bidding. And also, they did a huge deal with Saudis. And then El-Sisi pretty much proved himself to be like Mubarak. And unless something massive happens, I don't think El-Sisi is going to really be any different than Mubarak was. And Morsi was similar, even though he pretended not to be. He did do I could say was a political stunt, if anything, of letting the Palestinians across the Al-Rafah crossing. But in the end, he still brokered a favorable treaty, or not treaty, but a favorable ceasefire in Israel's favor in 2012. As every ceasefire, every treaty ends up favorable for the Israelis. And also, one of the main things was that Morsi was in favor of the Syrian rebels, which are Zionist-backed, in order to take out the anti-Israeli Assad government. They're also United States-backed. And the Assad government has been one of Israel's biggest enemies in the Middle East for many years. And the Morsi backed the Syrian rebels, and as well, Morsi was also a supporter of the United States government, and he and by supporting the United States government, he's supporting ultimately what is Israel's massive. They're the muscle that oftentimes will back Israel in the Middle East and whatever they're trying to achieve over there, and is ultimately the United States government. It's the military arm of the New World Order, the United States military. The United States government is the government that keeps that ultimately 100% controlled by the New World Order. All the Congress, all the president, the vice president, all that controlled by the New World Order, and they lead in order to keep the United States military as the military for the New World Order, the military arm for the New World Order. So the United States, it's said that the British, or London, is the finance capital, Washington, D.C. is the military capital, and you could say that in a way they're influencing over the Christian, over the American Christians. You could, and I could say possibly and also the Catholic Church, the Vatican, for doing a similar thing at the same time. You could say the Vatican, along with Tel Aviv, is the so-called spiritual capital of the New World Order in twisting these religions. Some say that Israel is actually the HQ for the New World Order. And that wouldn't. In some way, it was definitely created by the Rothschilds. It's definitely a. It's definitely a. Israel wouldn't have existed. It's similar to like. Well, actually, it's similar. There's a country actually that is in the textbooks is credited having been created by the Rothschilds. I think it was it what country? It's like one of those countries that wouldn't. But Israel wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the Rothschilds, because of course they said all that to happen, and I think they even went as far as possibly making World War I happen to make that possible. They are they're ultimately the puppet masters, and while they're at the very top, the Rothschilds are the world's most powerful family. There's no doubt about that. They're the only thing that it seems that throughout the shows, I end up repeating a lot of the same stuff. A lot of the, and it seems like because for a lot of people, you need that to get the message through their head, and also there's a lot of new listeners that need to be caught up. They need just to get the basic facts of these situations that I talk about, and the whole. But one of the things I haven't talked about too much is the Palestinians in their involvement. One thing that they've been involved in is the pro-Assad effort in the Syrian war, and I saw about that this weekend. The Palestinians they have their group, the PFLP-GC, which is a group inside of Syria that's been fighting alongside Assad government, and the Assad government. They have a lot of support from the minorities inside the country, the Christian minority, the Kurdish minority, and many other groups inside the country that are persecuted. The Syrians have supported, and the Syrian rebels have often taken effort in order to discriminate against these groups, against the Christians inside the country, the Kurdish inside the country. The Kurdish in the government of Assad they're on the same side ultimately, even though there's the disagreements between the land, and ultimately I think they've pretty much decided that will be after the war. They'll decide on the future of West Kurdistan, that is the Kurdish land inside of Syria. And in Iraq, there's the Iraqi Kurdistan, Syrian Kurdistan, so there's Turkish Kurdistan, and some of the land that the Kurds have is Iran. The Kurds have been one of those groups that have always been struggling in the countries that they are in, and they have been they've had a long battle inside of Syria with a constant battle against ISIS, and ISIS has done a lot of battling up there. It was Kobani, a huge battle that happened from in 2014 into 2015, and one of the first battles really when the United States got involved in Syria, Kobani broke out, and the United States being there didn't do anything to make that go any quicker. And we saw along as the war went on that the United States didn't seem to be helping in defeating ISIS, but they seemed to actually be facilitating with ISIS. And the Palestinians are fighting on the other side of ISIS in that country, and the Syrian rebels in that country. And the Syrian rebels in the country are back. Ultimately, there are people from many different countries. They're actually not that Syrian. I mean, the Syrian rebels are mercenaries by the West in order to take down the Assad regime, and their rise to the battle is not that spontaneous, like claimed by the Western media, saying that this happened just as a result of the Arab Spring and the protests that turned into violent insurgency. There is nothing spontaneous about that, and actually what we see is in the emails, it was 10 years before that they were talking about taking out Assad in 2006, which that was 5 years before the Syrian civil war, and the current now it's been 5 years after. It's been over 5 years since the Syrian war started, and yeah, it shouldn't even be called really a civil war at this point because there's now foreign armies involved. There's Iran's involved. Iran's involved in helping against terrorism. That's really one of the few countries that came from outside to help Syria's government against this nefarious plot. And the Russians have helped a little bit, but the Turkish, Qatari, the Saudis, the United Arab Emirates, pretty much the entire Gulf states, the United States, and more countries have been assisting with the effort against the Assad government. And ultimately the main ones involved. Turkish have been a big part of the ground. They practically have done a ground invasion inside of Syria before, and now they're trying to act like they're helping, or they're fighting ISIS vigorously, even though that they were practically accused by the entire world last year, and it was a known fact by most of the world last year that they were helping ISIS because they literally had a consulate in their country in Ankara. So the Turkish fighting ISIS, I'm still skeptical about that to this day. And the Saudis and all these other countries, they say they're doing the same thing in the United States. They're saying that they're doing that they're fighting ISIS, and the Israelis actually, when they attack a target, I don't think they even really pretend like they were fighting ISIS. They're saying that they were actually attacking the Syrian army, and they've attacked the Syrian army a few times, and they were attacking this week. And one other big attack that happened this week, and has been kind of ignored by the news because there's all this talk about these bombs up in New York and New Jersey, about a trash bomb that didn't even kill anybody, but we're hearing about it constantly. And in fact, everyone that was injured by this trash bomb was, and what I mean by a trash bomb, it was a bomb in a trash in a dumpster. 29 were injured, and they all got released out of the hospital by today. So the injuries were not serious, I guess, and we still hear tons and tons about it. And while there was something that could have sparked World War III yesterday, when the United States accidentally bombed 83 Syrian soldiers to their deaths. Yeah, that's right. The United States military killed 83 Syrian soldiers yesterday by accident. They said that they were attacking ISIS and bad info or something like that, and they killed the Syrian soldiers. So now, then the United Nations was called to emergency meeting. Russia called the United Nations emergency meeting. Russia said yesterday that they now it's conclusive that the United States supports ISIS. Syria, it says that this is they're obviously outraged by this, as their own soldiers are killed. I mean, imagine if 83 American soldiers were accidentally killed by the Syrian army. And now, actually, a United States spy drone was shot down by the Syrian government today. Yesterday, Israelis continued a drone strikes inside of Golan Heights, which is a disputed area between Syria and Israel, but ultimately, it's Syrian land. And this is also a very oil-rich area of Syria, so it's no surprise that the Israelis have their paws all over it. And so this happened after the strike. So now we're having this continue, what could be a back and forth between that will escalate, especially if the United States will now have their own soldiers killed by the Syrian army. This could mean that the Syrian government and the United States government could officially go to war, possibly within the next few months, which would not surprise me at all. The Syrian government is obviously very mad about that. The Russian government was pretty mad about that, and they had an emergency meeting, and ultimately the United States says that this is a big stunt. We don't know why they're making a big deal out of it. Imagine, and then they actually had the nerve to say this when they bombed hospitals and the schools, and they're the one, they definitely bombed the hospitals, and when they're the ones that have killed so many civilians over there in Syria and in other places in the Middle East. They said, what if we called one every time Russia bombed a hospital, school, or breadline? I'm like, what are you talking about? Russia has pretty much conducted a pretty clean effort without killing too many civilians, while the United States has been seen killing 100 here of civilians. And also, if you talk about what they do in Afghanistan and Iraq, then you see that ultimately 1.8 million, that's right, 1.8 million Iraqis are dead because of that war that started in 2003. And the United States is killed more over in Afghanistan. Ultimately, these whole, the ones that have killed so many civilians in the Middle East, we're going to talk about how Russia kills a bunch of civilians in the Middle East, and ultimately they're not the ones that are just accused of killing the Syrian soldiers based on, they say, on mistake. A mistake. It's obvious that this is no accident, and the Russians were pretty much alluding to this earlier today, that there was no accident. This was pre-planned, and if that comes out in the next few days that the Russian government is now conclusive on that, and that the United States admits or that was a intentional attack at some point, it might be game on. And what I mean by game on is that we're talking about war at this point, and it seems that this is about 2 years ago. This is when the United States first entered Syria, and they just set up a command center not that long ago. So they might be preparing for a massive escalation soon, which could be a result of what happened over the weekend with the attacks yesterday. This bombing might have just taken this war to a whole new level, and we better watch out. We better keep our eyes open, because these kind of actions, this is what leads to a world war. I mean, obviously this is no accident, and there's been action ever since this 2014. There's been reports of United States definitely attacking Assad rather than ISIS. That there was a lot of proof that, of course, like I've said many times before, that the places that the United States were attacking is where ISIS were making advances. And this bombing led to an ISIS advance, this very specific bombing. And this is maybe the first time that the United States have been so bold and loud about their actions, out there about their actions. And this is the first time that the United States government really acknowledged what happened, that they acknowledged that they have been killing Syrian soldiers, and I'm sure that it's happened, that there's been other Syrian soldiers killed, maybe 2 here, 4 there, stuff like that, but that they have 83 killed at one time. This is a big deal. And the United States also has before pretty much authorized a it pretty much authorized the attack against the attacks against the Assad military in this war. And they might say that, oh yeah, this was totally authorized, and we actually had authorized it before, and this was just part of our, one of the things that they've been trying to say and dupe Americans with. And I wonder if they're going to change that before they actually go to a full-fledged war with Assad. Is that this idea that they've been trying to say that the Syrian governments are the ones behind ISIS, or at least trying to allude to that. And they definitely have been going along with the lie, and this is one of the things that they have been going along with heavily, is the idea that the Syrian rebels and ISIS are fighting each other when really the Syrian rebels are helping ISIS. There is no moderate Syrian rebels. There is no moderate Syrian opposition or rebels. There is only the extremists in the country and just different groups of extremists. Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Free Syrian Army. But there is no, there's a joke going around by this page, Syrian memes. It's Syria memes, yeah. And it's a page, pro-Assad, talking about, there was one that, these people that are activists, and they say that, I can't support Assad. I support the pro-LGBT, pro-democratic, socialist rebels that only exist in my imagination, or something like that. Or it's kept going. I was like, yeah, the blah 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 pro-LGBT rebels. I'm thinking, yeah, that's kind of how some people think that these rebels. They think these moderate rebels exist that are so. But ultimately, these rebels are some of the most intolerant people in the country. As we've seen, they've targeted minorities. They've targeted the Christian community with crucifixion one time, or a few times. They've ate the organs of fallen enemies, as we've seen of what happened in that one video with the Syrian commander, the Syrian army commander, that he gets he's eating the liver of the Syrian army commander. We've seen that the Syrian rebels on YouTube admitting that they have chemical weapons and were planning to use them, pretty much showing off their chemical weapons that they have. And we've seen as well, loud and clear, that the Syrian rebels are fighting with terrorist groups. We've seen a lot of that. We've actually, we saw that, you see these Syrian rebels a lot of times, with the black Al-Qaeda flags, and at the same time the Free Syrian Army flags, and side by side. And we've also seen Free Syrian Army, one soldier was a terrorist in South Syria, supposed to be from Al-Nusra. And he had a Star of David necklace on. You could see the little Star of David on right by the bulletproof vest. So indicating that this guy is not an Al-Nusra Islamic extremist, obviously. He's imported Zionist, probably from Israel, maybe from the Mossad, one of the lower-level Mossad officers. One of their higher-end private Mossad officers, the one that impersonates al-Baghdadi. And what I mean by impersonates is that, not that there's no al-Baghdadi exists, but that the al-Baghdadi is not a real person. It's a character that Shaman Elliott uses, the Mossad agent that plays al-Baghdadi. And al-Baghdadi is a boogeyman like bin Laden, that a lot of people say he was the same thing, that he was Tim Osman was his real name. I just say that he might have actually been an actual person of Osama bin Laden, but he worked for the CIA and worked with the CIA against the pro-Soviet government in Afghanistan in the 80s. Al-Baghdadi is not a real person, is what I'm saying. I'm saying that he's character for sure, and that the whole ISIS thing. I mean, the group is Europeans, Israelis, United American soldiers or Americans, and they're all grouped into. And they're on this, and they all wear these black outfits to conceal their identity. That's part of the reason. I don't think it's really anything to do with Islamic traditional clothing or anything like that. This is just a part of the way they conceal their identities. And as we've seen, like the one guy that was the Jihadi John, that was from Britain, who was notorious. I remember a couple years ago, 2 years ago, when the whole ISIS scare really started, and he was the one that was there with the beheadings. He was doing the beheadings at first, and one of the first beheadings, the Free Syrian Army sold off the journalist to the ISIS. I think it was James Foley was the name of the journalist that was sold to ISIS a couple years ago, and he was beheaded. The ISIS group as a whole, also, you wonder how they get all these Toyotas. I mean, it's like they all get the same Toyota truck. I mean, I don't know if they bought them from some dealership out there in Iraq or Syria, but it definitely seems a little bit unusual. But what's even more unusual is how they have American supplies, and they have stuff that says United States on it. They have United States guns. They have United States money. And a lot of the people over there believe them to be supported by the United States, and they definitely have gotten supplies dropped to them by the United States. So there's definitely no doubt, I think, that the United States government is helping ISIS to this day. And checking out the chat right now, see what has happened since. And not too much going on right now. The whole Russian, or the whole Russian involvement inside of Syria has definitely brought ISIS to his knees practically. And now the group that was almost seen as uncontrollable 2 years ago, when they were taking over big parts of Syrian land, and they became the main opposition group in Syria, overshadowing the Free Syrian Army. In fact, the Syrian Army the Syrian Army was losing ground very quickly, and at one point looked like they were gonna, that the ISIS could make some push towards taking over, 60% of the country or something like that. They still have a big part of eastern Syria, but back then they were pushing west, and they were coming from Iraq, and they were seen at that time to possibly had a chance of taking over Iraq, and Baghdad there would be a push on Baghdad possibly by ISIS. I mean, for a long time, Mosul was taken over by ISIS. And ISIS's allies, the Syrian rebels, had controlled Aleppo for a long time. They controlled Palmyra until recently, but now Palmyra and Aleppo are no longer rebel/ISIS controlled. And ISIS actually has, for a long time, they had a little pocket of troops right by the Israeli border. And you wonder, how's that possible when the Israelis are supposed to be so against ISIS? Wouldn't you just think that they would obstruct those ISIS soldiers right on their border? Well, they didn't do anything about it. Or why didn't ISIS go across the border? Why didn't Israel attack ISIS if they're so that's right there on their border, if they're so against them? If they're right there on the border. And that's one of the questions that should come up when talk about Israel's involvement with ISIS, the United States' involvement with ISIS. But again back into the and going back to the main topic of the Palestine, how does it all relate to Palestine? Is that, because I've talked a lot about the Syrian civil war, is that the Palestinians have been fighting this war, and they've done a pretty courageous effort by fighting alongside of Assad and trying to regain his country back, or their country back. But Assad he's kind of the he resembles the Syrian people. He is the personification of the Syrian people, is Assad, and Assad. And the Syrian people, by 70% of the Syrian people back Assad. Seventy percent. So that's the United States here. Barack Obama supported by what at this point? 35%. His approval ratings are very low, and 70. That's double Obama's approval ratings at 70%. That's and that's the case. A lot of times they said that these leaders are unpopular by their people. They'll say that the people want this leader to go, and then they'll have Putin has a 90%, the 89% approval rating. Assad has a 70% approval rating. Chavez has a 70% approval rating. Don't you see a pattern here? These leaders are popular leaders that oppose the New World Order agenda, and in the end, it results to them having enemies over here in the United States, the enemies being the United States government. The Assad family, his father too, also did the same and opposed Israel and their agenda in the Middle East. And Assad was also disliked by the United States government. It's actually Assad's brother was seen as the one that was going to be the successor to Hafez al-Assad. But in the end, Assad's brother he died in a car crash, and that paved the way for him to succeed. And he was actually trying to be a doctor. Bashar al-Assad didn't really have the intentions of being the leader, and Hafez al-Assad died in 2000, paving the way for Bashar al-Assad to lead the country. And Bashar al-Assad has now ruled the country for 16 years. And now the Assad family is probably, I think that the Syrian people want them to stay. I think that I don't think that there's any. I think that the small group, and it's kind of like this rebel group. It kind of resembles, like what happened in Libya. That most of the people support Gaddafi, and these huge demonstrations happen towards the end. All these people gather around to support Gaddafi. You had thousands and thousands of people supported Gaddafi, and Gaddafi, who was also a big supporter of the Palestinian people, and Gaddafi was another big opponent to Zionism. And in the end, they killed him, and they killed him brutally. But he had it was a small group of rebels, these Islamic extremists that the United States funded, and these terrorists, these monsters that you see these Libyan rebels were, that killed Gaddafi. And hopefully the same thing doesn't happen to Assad. Because you don't necessarily have to be unpopular as a leader to get killed by the rebels. You just have to be on the wrong side of the United States government. It's what we've learned in recent years. What we learn now, that if you oppose the United States government, and if you oppose the New World Order, they'll start a so-called grassroots opposition in your country, install rebels against you, and the rebels will we'll keep fighting until you fall out of power and are possibly killed, and your government falls out of power and you're possibly killed. The Syrian opposition, of course, is non-spontaneous, like I said, and like the Libyan opposition was not spontaneous. And going back to the topic of Palestine, is that they have a group actually in there that's actually supportive of Assad, and kind of toes the line, or kind of thinks of is more of like the political ideology of Assad. And this group is the Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine, or the Palestinian Front for Liberation and Peace, and the PFLP, which is actually, I mean, they're not connected to the PFLP-GC in Syria that fights alongside Assad, but the PFLP, that's probably the best group inside of Palestine. But the group inside of Palestine, the government of Mahmoud Abbas, pretty much works as just almost like a governor for Israel to control the Palestinian people. And he doesn't really fight for the interests of the Palestinian people. And he belongs to the PLO, which the PLO was recognized by Israel. So that's telling to what their true stance is. And then they have these boogeyman Hamas, who ultimately Hamas were also partially they're connected to the same people that oppose the Assad government inside of Syria. So Hamas does not enjoy the support of the Assad government. The only ones that enjoy the support of the Assad government are the PFLP and the Palestinian government of the Fatah. Don't really support the Palestinian people. They are just a group that keeps the Palestinian people in control. It keeps them under control. The Palestinians suffer in many regards inside Palestine, and they suffer from regards from their basic human needs not having them, to the racial discrimination that they receive from the Israelis, to the bigger problem, of course, is them getting bombed by the Israelis on a daily, or not on a daily basis, but on a daily basis, the aggression that they receive from the Israeli military, and they have the occasional bombings that happen, which they happen more than you think. They actually happen, I'd say every few weeks there seems to be another bombing against the Palestinians, and it's absolutely tragic. And it goes under the media radar most of the time. It seems like, they say that some whatever happened, that we found rockets and they were being shot from some building, and the Palestinians and now we need to bomb the Palestinians again, and then they end up killing a few more, and it keeps happening. It's an endless cycle of violence by the Israelis. What more can be said about the Israelis than the fact that their bombings are unjustified, and the bombings, the older excuses, the Hamas are a group that's only been around since the 80s, but then they've been doing actions against the Palestinians since 1948. And they always say that the only reason they have to do actions against the Palestinians is because of the Hamas existence. But Hamas has only been around since 1980s. The Hamas group also, it said that the Hamas group at one point received money from Israel. At least that's what the rumor is. And that they're more of like a stage group that is just there to be the boogeyman that justifies any actions against Palestine by Israel. Otherwise, they would have absolutely no justification if they didn't have the Hamas threat all the time. And Hamas has actually been involved with very little, really, when it comes to any kind of noticeable actions against the Israeli military. They've mostly been involved in more. The Hamas has only got a few Israeli soldiers killed, while in the meantime, I would say that Hamas has been most responsible for a lot more Syrian soldiers being killed with their actions that in 1982, I believe they were involved with that, the Hama uprising against Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, who was the leader of Syria at the time. Also, the Assad government at the time, it was also the Muslim Brotherhood was one of the main people that they were facing, and the Muslim Brotherhood, I know, definitely linked with Hamas, or you were linked with Hamas. And Muslim Brotherhood is a pro-United States group. Their originations are from the Nazis. They were the Nazi proxy in North Africa at the time, and after the war ended, the British converted them into a pro-British, pro-Western group, and the United States has now used them in recent stuff such as the Arab Spring uprisings in Egypt. They brought about Morsi, their puppet, using the Muslim Brotherhood, and they also were involved with. They've also been involved in Libya with a group that the United States also uses a puppet in there. There's two capitals. In the Libyan war right now that's going on. There is two different capitals now because there's two rival groups fighting for power instead of Libya, and both are United States supported. But the basic gist of it is that there's Tripoli and Tobruk. There's a more Islamist group running the Tobruk government, and there's like the more moderate group running the Tripoli government. But they're both United States supported, and different United States allies support different countries. Things like Qatar, Turkey supports the Tobruk government, while the United Arab Emirates and I don't know who else. It was like the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait support United Arab Emirates and Egypt supports the, I think, or is it Kuwait? I mean, it's Kuwait. Supports the Tripoli government. And then there's also the Gaddafi, there's ISIS in there, and that's United States supported. And then there's actually the Gaddafi support, former Gaddafi loyalists are fighting ISIS instead of Libya. They're not mentioned by the news. In fact, the Gaddafi loyalists have been said to be gaining ground again, and that the Gaddafi support has definitely risen as they've seen the 5 years almost without Gaddafi and the horrors that have happened inside of Libya and the country falling apart, and they've seen enough for them to want to go back to the way it was not that long ago. And under Gaddafi, they didn't have the sectarian fighting. It's not even sectarian fighting, but this fighting between these groups. They didn't have the mass poverty that they have right now. They had our country was actually developed. They had basic stuff such as water to all parts. That was one thing that Gaddafi made a priority, was to bring water out into the remote parts of the desert inside of Libya, out into the desert. Bringing water out, there was more water for sure. There was a water for everyone. There was food for everyone, oil for everyone. All your basic needs were met inside of Gaddafi's Libya. And afterwards, now nobody gets. A lot of people are living in bad poverty. Different militias control different cities, and it's a mess. It's a mess. the the Syrian situation is similar to the Libyan situation in that, and Libya, but Assad has not fallen. It's not quite advanced on that stage, and that's a lot. It's definitely a mess, but it's not as much of a mess that Libya is on that part. And Libya, there's a possibility that Gaddafi might rise back to power, and they actually have tried to suppress the Gaddafi loyalists inside the country by handing out death sentences and believing that would deter any support for that group in the country. But in reality, it's probably only bolstered support, and they've gotten more supporters out on the streets in favor of the Gaddafi loyalists inside the country. In fact, there was reports after they were given a death sentence, was the death sentences that were handed out in July 2015. In the weeks after, there was big demonstrations of the green flag, Gaddafi supporters out in the streets, and for the first time really ever since the so-called revolution happened. And some people even call the Syrian rebels, they call that the Syrian revolution that's happening, and they think that the fall of Assad would be a revolution, even though it's backed by so many foreign countries and it's obvious motives by the United States government, and the fact that it would probably turn into the Syrian regression into a Wahhabi Assadi style state, like the Gulf countries that support the Syrian revolution. The Syrian, they could say the Syrian infiltration by Zionist-backed groups in the United States government. I'm just going to go back to chat room, see what's going on real quick, see if anything's going on. Wow, we're already at almost 10:30 right now, and see what's going on. Not too much happening in the chat room right now. And yeah, the Libyans were handed democracy, as you could say that. After democracy, that's the result. The Syrians, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to give them or hand them democracy. But what's really happening is they're being forced democracy, or it's not even democracy. Because what would happen is probably some kind of dictator would take charge. Like what they, in a way, you could see what a United States-backed dictatorship looked like was Saddam Hussein. In the 80s, he was backed by the United States, and his war in Iran was backed by the United States. His gassing the Kurds was backed. The weapons were United States made, and you could say that it was he was given the green light to go into Kuwait, and later, just a little bit after, they decided that this would be a provocation for war. Also, Saddam had visited the United States. Saddam Hussein was 100% United States backed in the first 12 years from 1979 to 1991. And Saddam Hussein actually belonged to the same kind of party that Assad belonged to, the Ba'ath Party, but he made a different faction of Ba'athism, which was the Iraqi Ba'athism, which was different than the type that Hafez al-Assad followed, obviously, because Hafez al-Assad was not United States backed. He was Hafez al-Assad had some weak ties, not weak ties, but he had ties to the Soviet Union, but he definitely wasn't like the Afghani government that was backed by the Soviet Union. And there were even, for example, they weren't like a Soviet satellite to an extent. They were independent, but they had some relations with the Soviet Union. And Hafez al-Assad had decent relations with Iran, of course, which he actually backed Iran against Iraq and Saddam Hussein, which actually the Soviet Union and the United States backed Saddam Hussein against Iran during the Iran-Iraq war, even though that Iran was invaded by Iraq, not the other way around, like people might assume. Ayatollah Khamenei did not order any kind of invasion against Iraq, and Iraq invaded Iran on and ultimately was Saddam Hussein tried to show off, and he ended up epically losing because in the end Iran won the war. But after millions had died, and I say ultimately on both sides, it was in the millions of deaths toll. It was a very ugly end to the war, and most Iranians into the country that remember that war would say the same thing. It was absolutely horrible. And that was the United, but that's what I'm saying. We've seen what United States, they backed Saddam, they backed the Saudi government, they back Erdogan, as we've seen with the kind of power he's taken since the coup in July. That he's pretty much took out his political enemies, and it's all labeled them as people who conspired with the coup. But in reality, there's only the people that conspired with the coup. The coup actually seemed staged in the regard that he didn't. It looked like it was staged for him to consolidate power. Now, some people pointed fingers at the United States for staging a coup, but I think that why would they stage a coup against a NATO ally? I think that Gulen as well might have been some kind of controlled opposition, or this is some kind of elaborate thing for Erdogan to consolidate power rather than the United States having done a coup. But there was some stepping up of the Turkish. The Turkish decided to close off the Incirlik Air Force Base where they had the nuclear weapons. The United States has nuclear weapons inside of Turkey. So there was definitely some tense relations afterwards. But Turkey also was in definitely had been just recently very close to the United States, especially after the Turkish Air Force had took out a Russian plane that wasn't even in their airspace. They said that the plane was in Syrian airspace when there was no proof of that, or that was in Turkish airspace and was actually in Syrian airspace. But the Turkish government and the Russians had a pretty big fallout, and for a while there was some serious tensions. But then that kind of now has been overshadowed by the recent coup attempt. And now we have a pretty weird scenario where the United States government, the weird position towards the Turkish government right now. The Turkish government's one government that always says how they're support. Well, they don't always say, but they bring it up every now and then. Oh, we're support of the Palestinian people, and we are. They'll say that they do a lot for the Palestinian people, but they're one of the top 10 traitors is Israel. In fact, they have been economically, from a standpoint of economics, one of the closest allies of Israel is the Turkish government. And the Turkish government has been ultimately in that way that it's like a political ploy. A lot of times these Gulf countries do, like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, is that they a lot of times say that they back the Palestinian people, and I don't know what that's exactly about. I think it's partially made to look good on world stage, and ultimately what has happened is it's very disgusting cooperation between the Zionists and the Gulf states, and this this dirty trio between the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, all collaborating. They do use that though. They say, Saudi Arabia uses it to an extent, and it's like the same thing. They say that they are not in favor of Israel because they don't have official relations with them, but in reality, they have unofficial relations with them that are very strong, and their military relations with them, they work very closely together on military relations. And right now, it's funny. It's like if you do radio shows and you have a pet, it seems like you can't go really the whole show without your pet bothering you in one way or another. Either my dog starts barking during the show, or he's doing right now where he just comes and starts licking my feet. I don't really feel like pushing him out the door where he might start barking, but one of those little chihuahuas too. But yeah, if you're a radio show and you host and you have a pet, you know the struggle definitely. I don't know, maybe he's warning me. One time I remember I was doing the show and he kept barking, and then one of the commenters was in the chat was saying it's like, oh, he's got IDF early the detection system, and I was thinking another one was saying is like, oh yeah, there's one in his backyard he's warning him about. There's one of the Mossad's in the backyard. He's definitely doing a good way of grabbing my attention, but he's definitely not grabbing my attention towards the backyard. I'm just trying to figure out what the hell he's doing. I'm gonna check the chat room. The chat room is so quiet today. Like it's uncharacteristically quiet. But I know I'm not to save energy. It's like when I get started ranting and everything, it brings all the people in the chat room. It seems, but when I just talk in normal volume and just go along with the show, go with the flow, it doesn't really bring the same amount of people into the chat room. Wow, there's only been just a few comments since 10 o'clock. I don't know what's up. I mean, the Mossad's definitely censoring the chat room right now. It was like 10 o'clock and just dropped off, and then actually 10:07 was we're getting okay comments till about 10, and then it just got all quiet real quickly. And my dog's bothering me now. I gotta move him out real quick. Sorry about that. And continue on with the show. And I don't know. I think today I just feel a little tired. Maybe perhaps is why I don't have quite the same energy as before. I don't know. I hope my audio and everything's okay, because there's a possibility that. But actually, no. I saw somebody was commenting about what I was saying just a few minutes ago. Just so quiet in the chat room today, but whatever. This week has been definitely an eventful week with what happened over there in Syria and this massive provocation by the United States military against Syrian soldiers. It was ultimately 83 of them. 83 Syrian soldiers being killed. 62 is the number the Russians are saying. 83 is the number the Syrian government is saying. And the United States government, I don't know if I think they might have said 62. I don't know what they're exactly saying, but I don't know what they're exactly saying numbers-wise. I just know they're saying that was an accident. And that being either way, this is a massive provocation, and the fact is that this is the kind of accident that leads to a world war. And it's definitely eye-opening of what kind of times we might be entering if this continues. And it will continue, these kind of provocations. You better believe it. You better believe this won't end with just with this happening and it gets shoved under the rug. I don't think this is just going to get shoved under the rug. And I think that, like what happened today, what I saw is that the U.S. spy drone was shot down by the Syrian army. You can imagine a few more of these that could happen. This is the kind of stuff that's already happened, but there'll be quite a few more of quite a few more of these events happening, and possibly United States soldiers coming under attack. And if that happens, you better believe that soon we'll be getting close to war. we're close to war when Wolf Blitzer comes on all comes on all serious in the Situation Room. Wolf Blitzer here in the Situation Room. We have reports that the Pentagon has announced that they'll be doing strikes here, and here inside of these different cities. Right now, we're going to go to our correspondent there in Aleppo, who's going to be talking about the Situation Room. And I find, the Wolf Blitzer, all these reports are a complete joke. I mean, the only way, I think that I would take more seriously when they have the Situation Room. You have the Situation from the Jersey Shore comes on right there. And he starts, here's the situation, yo, bro. Yeah, we got a serious situation here. See, right here, we got that show's been off the air for a while now, but I would take that. I'll take that seriously. I'll take that more seriously than fucking Wolf Blitzer or all these other talking heads. Anderson Cooper. What else? What's that one? Don Lemon or whatever. Yeah, I remember the one during the state dinner where Larry Wilmore started roasting everybody, which I don't think that was expected because everyone's reaction to that. I remember when he said that it's like, it said that Barack Obama and Steph Curry hang out. And it makes sense because they both like dropping bombs from long range. I was like, damn. And then started saying, we got alleged journalist Don Lemon in the house. Don Lemon flicks off Larry Wilmore. And they kept going on saying and talking about the CNN. It was like a roast almost. I mean, not quite as bad as a roast. If there's a roast, I mean, we got what kind of people? I mean, they don't deserve a roast. A roaster, it's not exactly a bad thing when you get roasted. So I mean, it's like I could throw that into but the roast would be. I mean, there's like the stuff would have to be funny for them to get roasted about. Throw these politicians in there. I don't know. We can throw some more funny looking ones in there. Throw Ted Cruz and just have a field day on his weird face. Remember that one woman that looked like had a face like looked like Ted Cruz. It looked like a female version of Ted Cruz. I felt bad for that woman because it's like, damn, looking like Ted Cruz is not a good thing. But yeah, we're already at 10:42 right now. So we'll continue on the show. The Palestinians have suffered for years, and the Palestinians are subject to the violence by Israel all the time. And the Palestinians, they've been forced, a lot of them live over here, even in the United States. And the Palestinians they became much more into the attention now of the people around the world. And, it's a good thing that I think that now finally with Facebook and all these different sites, and they have Facebook over there in Palestine, and I've actually have a couple friends over there, and they are able to share about their experience a little bit more, and they've definitely grabbed the attention of the world a lot more than they used to. And there used to be practically no knowledge of this here in the United States, and now there's more knowledge. I remember actually it being mentioned like one time in high school about the Palestinian situation. Which I remember talking with one teacher, and he tried to whitewash it down and try to say that because Hamas wants to kill all Jews, this is why the Israelis have to do what they do in Palestine. But this is also the same one that I remember he mockingly said, and that's a true story, that right after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, he said, look, the religion of peace strikes again, which is like something like almost the British First people would say, and alleging that not just terrorists, but you're trying to say that Muslims as a whole are violent, and that the whole religion as a whole is violent. When you actually look at if you look at the people of people have said many times, of course, here in the United States, and they even it's not just something that on the fringe. I mean, I think that even the mainstream news media definitely has made Muslims look violent. But if you seem like one of the ways they've done that is that this guy they show a lot of times when they show Muslims, or they show this one guy screaming, and then you realize that the guy's actually an actor and he's an Israeli Mossad guy. It's a similar situation to al-Baghdadi. Because a lot of times they pretend to be Arabs or Muslims, like they did with the King David Hotel bombing, that they dressed up as Arabs, and then they went in there and bombed it, and then they didn't apologize to the British that were killed. They only apologized to the Jews that were killed inside the building. And if you haven't looked that up, King David Hotel bombing in 1946, it happened against the King David Hotel bombing in 1946 against the people. It was a lot of British people in there, and it was a terror group that did it. Ultimately, is what they called themselves, a terror group. They said that they said something about that this is that they wanted their land now. They wanted that land that they were offered, or not just offered, but they were promised in the Balfour Declaration. And of course, this is one event has been whitewashed from history, and then the USS Liberty has came up a little bit more into attention with Telesur and other news sources talking about it. USS Liberty was a ship that was attacked by the Israeli military, and I've interviewed USS Liberty survivors twice on this show. And I give them a shout out. I give Ronald Kukal, give Joe Lentini, Joe Miodors, give Larry Thorne, give Phil Torney, and forgetting anyone in there of the ones that I know. I have a few. Actually, I have a few on my Facebook. I'm pretty sure all of them came on the show. Came on that first show, practically all but one. And Phil Torney was on the most recent show that I did back in January. He was on there, and Ronald Kukal was on for a second, but it was mostly Phil Torney and his story. And I remember back the first time that I did it was most of the time it was Lentini talking. Joe Lentini was talking, and there was also Joe Miodors was in there for part of the time, and there was as well. Ron Kukal, I don't know if he was actually in that show. Ron Kukal was just for a short time in January. It was a great show. Those were great shows to have done. And the USS Liberty survivors, definitely give them a big shout out. And anybody that hasn't looked up USS Liberty, definitely look up. But this ship was attacked by Israel, and it was pretty much. They said it was a mistake. They saw that it was the United States ship was an Egyptian ship. But it was clearly marked with U.S. markings, and they killed 34 United States soldiers and ended up injuring 171. Including some of the ones in the 171 which were practically the entire ship. Some of the ones in the 171 I interviewed, they strafed them in the water with the helicopters and hit them with machine gun fire when they were in the water. And I remember one time on the radio encountering somebody that defended the USS Liberty attack, and I really wish that I could have the USS Liberty people, have them actually directly talk to those USS Liberty people and say that to them on the phone, or even imagine saying it to them in their face, trying to say that to them. These people that were personally injured by Israel during that time, and they at the time they had plans to nuke Cairo. Because they were going to blame the attack on the U.S. soldiers on Egypt. But the Egyptians were not the ones, of course, that did the attack. And the Israelis later said, instead of going along with the false flag plan of saying that it was a Egyptian attack on American soldiers, they said it was an accident. And LBJ was quoted as saying that I don't care if all of them die, that, and this I'm paraphrasing, but I don't care if all of them die. I don't want to embarrass Israel. And in the end, the attack led to was just one more. Didn't lead to the United States jumping in the war, which could have easily been World War III. But the attack was another attack by Israel on American soldiers. There was also where they activated terror cells inside of Egypt, known as the Levant Affair, because they felt like Eisenhower was getting too cozy with Nasser. And 67 was also the year that this happened around the same time as the Palestinians were getting their land taken from them, and then they had the massive occupation that happened after the 67 war, which the 67 war was really between Israel and Egypt. And Egypt did not provoke the war. It was actually Israel provoked the war. They invaded. Nasser he defended his country the best he could, but he had hospitals bombed, civilians were bombed by the Israelis. It was horrible. The 67 war was probably made the worst war that the Palestinians were. It was made the worst time for the Palestinians besides 1948, and 73 was also a pretty bad Yom Kippur War, and then Operation Protective Edge might have been the worst since then, since 1973 and 2014. But they've had multiple occurrences like this where they've been involved in events that have killed thousands of them, and ultimately this is a Holocaust that's going on. And the Israelis are denying that the Holocaust is going on. They scold people all the time for, for saying that, for denying the Holocaust, but ultimately a lot of times that's just a thing that they say to make you look like a shithead, to say that you're denying the Holocaust. By acknowledging that a Holocaust is going on there, the Palestinians are being killed in a Holocaust. 6 million of them are dead because of the Israelis, and the Israelis are continue to be funded with your taxpayer dollars. Their F-16s, their bombs that they've seen, children are signing the bombs in Israel. This is how sick their culture is. Sign their bombs with messages like "From Israel was love" or something like that to Palestinians, or something like, "Oh, here's your missile of relish," or that's one thing that one of the Zionist rabbis said is that is we're going to give them missiles of relish. And these Zionist rabbis have said all kinds of stuff. They said that he doesn't consider Palestinians to be humans. This is the kind of rhetoric come from Israel, and this is what's being directed towards the Palestinians. The Palestinians are definitely the victims, and the Palestinians, what did the Israelis blame the Palestinians? These images of suffering coming out of Palestine on. They say that they call it Pallywood, and they say that they have their own film. Their own films that make the Palestinians suffer and look worse than it is. You know what does that sound like? Is that they all times they criticize people, the Zionists criticize people for acknowledging the Zionists in Hollywood, when in reality, this Hollywood does not really exist. The Palestinians are suffering in a way that I think even a lot of activists don't realize the extent when it comes to, it's not just that the land has been taken away from them, it's that most of the stuff that they need to live has been taken away from them. Most of their families have been separated and broken up. A lot of them have been thrown in jails, horrible jails that these Palestinians go to when they just stand up to the Israelis in any way, shape, or form. They're killed by the Israelis. The Israelis have also been involved with killing Palestinians, even in Syria. They kill Palestinians that are not even in their country. They also have tried to strip away all of their identity, like what Cecil Rhodes did to Zimbabwe with their native people and renaming it Rhodesia. It's like what the Israelis have done by taking all the Palestinian culture and replacing with the Israeli culture. And it's a sick culture. It's a culture of murder. With like what I've seen with these shirts that say one shot, 2 kills, and it's showing a crosshairs over a pregnant Arab woman. That's sick. It's horrible. It's a tragedy. it's war crimes, genocide, and the Palestinians are having to endure this. Palestinians are proud people and are fighters. I think that it won't be too long before the Palestinians rise up again at third intifada. And when it happens, maybe this time some of these Israeli soldiers will have what's coming to them. A lot of these Israeli soldiers, there's some Israelis that are brave enough to stand up against the draft and not become an Israeli soldier to murder Palestinians, and they go to jail for it. Jail is not just mandatory to men, but it's also mandatory to women in Israel. Everyone is forced to go into the draft inside of Israel, like what they are talking about possibly of a draft here in the United States for both men and women. There's already a draft like that in Israel. And what has made it such a warlike culture, and a culture of death and destruction, that people watching Palestinians get bombed like it's fireworks from a hilltop. We've seen pictures inside of Israel also of them celebrating the Israelis, Mossad's crimes here in the United States. And what they were partially involved in was 9/11 and dressing up as the Twin Towers. Yes, look it up. And at the Purim, one of their holidays over there. We've also seen pictures of, or what, not pictures, but we've seen, like memes and stuff that the Israelis spread around, or it's a joke at least, that spreads around their country, and of Rachel Corrie pancakes. That's what they. That's the joke of a tragedy that happened. Saying because she got ran over by a bulldozer, she was defending a house from being torn down by Israelis. They laugh about the death of Rachel Corrie, and there's also been other Western journalists that have been killed by the Israeli military. There was one that was shot in the head, a British reporter that was shot in the head. I think he was belonged to BBC, possibly. Or no, it was a British reporter. I don't think he belonged to BBC, but it was a British reporter who was shot in the head by the Israeli military. There's been other Westerners that have been killed by Israel inside the country, such as like the Rachel Corrie case. Practically a girl, she was only 21, ran over, and the sociopath, this man a sociopath to run over somebody like that, and who's just defending these Palestinians' home. And what coverage do you hear in the United States? That should be in the history books. What if this had happened in Iran or something like that? An American was ran over by a bulldozer over there. They'd be saying that we need to bomb them the next day. But with Israel, it'll go on and how to say it was Rachel Corrie's fault for doing what she did, her courageous action. Bravery. All the people, bravery encourages what it takes to stand up for the Palestinian people and do something like what Rachel Corrie did. And also the Palestinian people who stand up for themselves, these people are brave and courageous. And hopefully one day they'll have their land back. And not just hopefully, I know they'll have their land back one day. Eventually the New World Order will fall. And when it does fall, Israel will fall apart with it, as it's the Rothschild's creation. The antidote to this, the antidote to Israel is the Palestinians' bravery. And that's what they have a lot of, is that the Palestinians will throw rocks at a tank. They'll stand up into the face of tyranny and look it dead in the eyes and say, come on, take me on. These Palestinians are very... they've suffered a lot, but at the same time, they have a very fighting spirit.
One and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights, when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge charge of the country. Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return. And if I back down now